This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Welcome to Week 11 here on Tuesday night, November 12th, 2024. Hi, hello, and how are you? This is the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC. Connect with them at FFPC on X, and of course, myffpc.com, myffpc.com. My name is Eric Balkman. You can connect with me on the X at Eric Balkman, EricBalkman. It's right on the bottom of the screen. You can also hear me on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on the FFPC YouTube channel, and of course, you know me from the FFPC as well. We are entering Week 11, and I know many of you have already been participating over the course of the last 9 weeks in the FFPC Weekly Challenge, and I would invite you to do so once again in Week 11. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge at myffpc.com right now. Enter for as little as $35 or $200. Entries are going to go in the format of both classic and slim, so you can play with kickers and defenses or without. You can win up to $2,500 when you register for the weekly challenge at myffpc.com. And as a reminder, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which I will tell you the rest of the week's schedule for the FFPC shows this week at the conclusion of the broadcast tonight. So let's get into it. We're joined by FFPC royalty tonight, a former FFPC main event overall champ who took it down all comers in 2009, winning the grand prize. He's got more than a dozen high stakes FFPC league championships under his belt, probably closer to 2 dozen by now. And right now he's in the top 50 of the FFPC main event, a contest that is going to pay out a $1 million grand prize. We are heading into Week 11, and he joins us tonight as he chases that $1 million carrot. Please welcome back onto the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the one, the only, the Don Metter. Don, welcome in, man.
What's up, Eric? Thanks for having me tonight.
It's exciting to have you on. Very excited to always talk to a former main event champ. And I think as a guy who's been playing, since you've won it, it's been 15 years or whatever, boy, you really got to respect the level of luck and skill that it takes to take down a grand prize. You've done it already once and you're trying to do it again, man. It's not easy.
Flipping hard. You need karma like you wouldn't believe. It's a do good, get good situation, man. It's almost like you have to have the crystal ball and it just breaks your way.
Yes.
A lot of luck. It's a lot of skill. And honestly, it's a lot of time. You got to pay attention. You really, really do.
What's the most difficult part for you aside from luck, which we know, listen, that's going to happen to anybody. What's the biggest challenge for you as far as like the work that you put into it?
So my mental side of this, I'm really kind of stubborn sometimes. If I like a guy going into the year, I tend to hold on to him longer than perhaps I should, thinking this is the week, this is the week, this is the week. It's changed a lot since I won in 09. 09, you didn't have the number of games, the multitude of games on the nights of the week. You had, I believe, maybe one waiver wire. It was 1 day a week. Mm-hmm. Saturday games were not as prevalent, or Thursday games. It's really almost turned into a fantasy baseball where you have to watch every single day. And really the hardest thing for me is this new, thank you NFL union, negotiation, the 4-week IR. Yeah. It used to be you'd have guys, and I think that the injury reports that you get today, they're a little bit more Bill Belichickian in that you really don't know information, and there's one-upsmanship and gamesmanship. Did I just come up with a whole phrase? Bill Belichickian? I mean, is that, that might be a thing. It's really, really hard. And I don't really pay attention to injury reports anymore until Friday. I just don't do it.
The other thing that you jog my memory on, I don't know what year this happened. They got rid of the probable tag too. Like Correct. we don't get probable anymore, which because I think the reason the NFL got rid of it is because like 99% of the guys who were probable ended up playing. And questionable, I remember fantasy football when questionable meant something, Don. And
You're
now
exactly
it's just
right.
And now it's just kind of like, questionable is the new probable, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes and this has bitten me this year too, where I assume a guy's practicing, he's listed as questionable, and then he doesn't play. So you still got to have your antenna up for that.
Yeah, it's tough, and we all have lives, and so this last weekend I'm in New York, and Sunday morning I said to my wife, oh, hold on, I got to check my inactives for the early game in England. Then I got to check my early game for 12 o'clock here in the States. Then the late game. I mean, literally, thank God we have a phone because you couldn't have done it. I don't know if you remember, but back when the other service was around that started all this with Emil and Lenny, you had like an 800 number that you called and left your lineups on, or an email. I mean, imagine doing that in today's game. I don't think you could. I don't know logistically how you could do it.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about too. I mean, how far high stakes fantasy football has come, even the last 5 years, and then you look back 15, 20 years ago, it's a totally different animal. But we roll with the punches because we love it and we keep doing it. And that's
adapt, improvise, overcome, baby.
That's what it's all about. We're going to adapt, improvise, and overcome all the obstacles facing us on the show tonight because we got a lot to get to. We're going to talk about the Bears' new offensive coordinator. We're going to talk about the backfield that's going on in Jacksonville right now with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. And we'll get into the Baltimore target situation between Zay Flowers and Deontay Johnson before we sign off tonight. I want to kick things off as we go to the desert. Oftentimes, we don't start the show with a team that's on bye, but that's what we're going to do tonight, Don. I want to talk about the Arizona Cardinals. Trey Benson, 10 carries, 62 yards, 2 catches for 25 yards this past week. The week before, 8 carries for 37 yards, a catch for 18 yards. He also got into the end zone that week. These are 2 of his 3 most highest usage games of the season so far. Has he already turned this into a running back by committee situation in Arizona? The reason I bring this up is not because, hey, you're not going to think about, benching James Conner at this point, because as long as he's healthy, you're trotting him out there. But Trey Benson, is he getting close to being flex worthy, especially now that we get this week off and then they come in after the bye, 2 weeks more of prep for the rookie to get his feet even deeper into the water? How do you look at this Cardinals running back situation right now?
Absolutely. He's definitely something to monitor. I think this is this last game that he had carries in the first quarter. Prior to this, it was garbage time. The week before against my beloved Bears, right? That's kind of was a coming out party for him. I think a couple of things you have to look at. The NFL is a game, but the NFL more so than anything is a business. You have James Conner, 29 years old, a free agent at the end of the year. They invested a 3rd-round pick in Trey Benson. This team needs to see what they have. I'm a little bit surprised at how well Arizona has done so far this year. So I think had they been reversed in the win column and maybe been 3-6 or even 4-5 or a couple games back, I think you have already seen more of a 50-50 split, which is kind of what I was expecting. I drafted Benson in several leagues, especially draft expert format. I like him a lot, and I expect them to continue to see where he's going to be. Because let's face it, James Conner, through his history, has never been an Ironman. He's never been one to stay healthy for an entire year. I'm really surprised he's made it this first part of the year, and he's been relatively unscathed.
29 years old, a guy who has dealt with injuries over the course of his career. He is an unrestricted free agent heading into next season at the age of 30. Could be wheels up for Trey Benson in 2025, as he should be assuming that lead back role with Arizona this season. As you said, Don, it's already starting to happen for Benson going forward. Tua Tagovailoa did not have the greatest game last night against the Los Angeles Rams. He ends up 20 of 28, 207 yards, a touchdown, a pick. He took 3 sacks, 1 carry for -1 rushing yards. And I think sometimes we're prisoners in the moment in fantasy football, and we think about what he did this past week. That should not influence what we do with him this coming week. And now as he is going back home to Miami to take on the Raiders Is he actually a sneaky start in week 11?
Someone's going to erupt on this team eventually. I always said the last couple of years, Tua is an amazing draft expert quarterback. He'll throw 200, 200, 210, then 440 yards, 370-yard touchdowns. And the guy looks like Dan Marino from the early 80s. I would certainly, without hesitation, look to start him. I would expect a minimum 300-yard game, couple touchdowns out of him. I think Tyreek Hill's going to get on the scoreboard in a big, big way, and watch out for our guy Achane. But yeah, I like Tua a lot. Realize he missed 4 or 5 games. It's kind of been preseason for him the last couple games, because I'm sure he didn't throw much as he was battling back from the concussion. So I think he needed a little time to get his timing down. That offense is built on timing, especially on the longer plays. I think this is something that he'll be ready to come out and feel real comfortable this week.
Yeah, that game right now, it's a 1:00 kickoff. The Dolphins are 7.5-point favorites, total of 44. No excuse. I mean, especially with Tyreek Hill playing through an injury. He looked all right last night in the plays that he made. Jalen Waddle had a bit of a resurgence too. Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane look awesome. So it should be wheels up for Tagovailoa in week 11. You consider the teams this week that are on buys in week 11. It is the Cardinals, it is the Panthers, it is the Giants and the Buccaneers. So if you had Mayfield, if you had Kyler Murray, maybe Tagovailoa is your backup, and he is going to be an excellent backup this week and definitely startable. I'm with you on that too, Don. Let's talk about Darnell Mooney. This is a guy that I grabbed on a few of my teams, but like a lot of players at this point in the season, I wish I had him on more squads. He was going pretty late in drafts, even all the way up to the start of week 1. You ended up getting him in a lot of drafts. I would assume some draft experts formats as well. What made you want to load up on Mooney if we look back to drafting season? What were the flags that you saw? You're like, hey, this is a guy I want to add at his price right now because he's going to pay off in 2024. And quite frankly, he has for you.
Here's what my feeling on Darnell Mooney was. Darnell Mooney on Chicago 2 years ago was a really decent player. Ran crisp routes, had good hands. I don't think he had 1,000 yards receiving, but the Bears, I think, threw for 2,300 yards total on the year, and he had about 900. I didn't see any reason for that guy to be let go, to be honest. He runs great routes. And if you look at the offense that they were bringing in Atlanta, they spread the ball around. That offensive system spreads the ball to both wide receivers. And let's face it, like I said, the reoccurring theme in the NFL, it's a game, but it's a business. They paid him about $13 million, first day or second day free agent signing. It's someone Atlanta targeted. They're playing to win now, bringing in Kirk Cousins. You got a beast in the backfield in Bijan. Drake London's good. And honestly, Drake London surprised me. When I drafted Darnell Mooney, I thought maybe in the course of a year, maybe London's going to be worth a point more a game, maybe 20 points total on the year. And I'm looking at Drake London going in the second round, early third, and I was drafting Darnell Mooney in 12 or 13. It's all about value, as you know, when you're drafting, you're filling your teams up.
I think that's a great point you make, too. I looked up on Fantasy Mojo, Darren Armani, the godfather of the Pros versus Joes competition, the guy who runs FantasyMojo.com at FantasyMojo on X. If you are playing in the FFPC, highly recommend you get a subscription to that. I just looked at the final ADP for the FFPC main event. Drake London, 209 as wide receiver 11. Mooney, wide receiver 62 at the 1304. You could get Darnell Mooney essentially, what was that? 11 and a half, 10 and a half rounds later than London. And if you viewed him at that point, then yeah, you're going to take him. He was going in the Brandon Cooks, Jalen Polk, Andrei Yoshivas territory. And Darnell Mooney was the guy that you wanted there. So congratulations on him. Just fantastic stuff from him so far this season. A guy who went from, kind of being an afterthought just as bench fodder. And now he's looking as like, a top 30 receiver each and every week going forward. I might be opening up a scar here. I'm not sure. Maybe it's too soon to talk about the Chicago Bears because, and I don't know, Don, I honestly don't know where you fall in on this because there is a lot of Bears fans at the start of the season that thought Caleb Williams was the answer, and he was going to make an immediate contender for the playoffs, and the offense is going to fire with all those weapons they had added in the offseason. And I know there are some Bears fans out there, they're like, well, I like it, but let's just wait and see. Well, 9 games into the season, Chicago has fired Shane Waldron as their offensive coordinator. He held the post for about 10 months. They've given the reins over to Thomas Brown, the passing game coordinator, a guy who was the OC in Carolina last year for a portion of the season. I want to get your take on where the Bears season is headed here from a fantasy perspective as far as the offense goes. And what is the impact, if any, on guys that you own a lot of, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet. Let's talk about those guys, Caleb Williams, and the receivers as well. I'll kind of let you wax poetic on this.
All right. Well, before I start and before I declare, can you give me 1 second? Be right
Absolutely.
back.
Yeah.
Hold
Okay.
on.
Yep. So Don is going to get prepared to answer this Bears question right now. The guy, the man, the myth, the legend, who's got the what is that? The what do they call that?
Macho Libre. You cannot say you're a Bear fan if you don't have. I can't. I have to be anonymous when I do it. See it on the side. I got the Bear emblem.
Right. Yes, we got it. It's one step up above the paper bag.
That's right.
It's
kind of a classy thing. We do this, and in the nicer neighborhoods of Chicago. And by the way, Balky, I promise I'll only wear this for this question. And then we'll go back to normal.
The Nacho Libre Bears mask, Don Metter is going to answer this question about the Chicago Bears. Fire away, my friend.
All right. So personally, I like Caleb Williams. One of my downfalls in fantasy is I'm not a giant college fan. Mm-hmm. So I go more by what my buddies say, what the prognosticators say. And I have to tell you, to a man, there was about 6 or 7 friends of mine. One of my very good friends, Mike Thomas, out in California. We draft every year. I see him once or twice a year. He said, I don't like him. And he lives out in Southern California. He says, I don't like him. And I look at what the team is doing. And again, talking to Mike, and we said, why do you bring in Keenan Allen? Why? Roma Dunze, great player, wrong pick. The Bears need a lineman. You know what this week happened? 9 sacks. 9 sacks and 3 points. 3 points against New England and 9 sacks. What are you going to do when you go against Minnesota? When you go against your divisional games, Detroit, Green Bay? Those are tough games. Those are tough teams to play. So I think in the offseason, first of all, I'll step back. I think everything that's happening the rest of this year, it's irrelevant. I think the coaching staff's going to be totally wiped out. It'll totally be gone. They've probably already lost the locker room in that regard. The GM did a great thing last year. He swindled Carolina and got DJ Moore. He got the extra pick. Fantastic. But it's a what have you done for me lately league. So we're waiting to see where this goes next year. The hot name is the guy out of Detroit,
Ben Johnson.
Ben Johnson. My buddy said to me, it'd be great, Josh McDaniel, because when you think about it, he does a lot of those 3 and 4 step drops. And, one of the knocks on Caleb Williams I've read about all week, he's holding the ball too long. He doesn't have that internal clock in his head. So, maybe that's what they need. I don't know, but I'll tell you this. The defense looks solid. They got all the position skill players. But if you can't protect more than a second and a half, it doesn't matter if you have Jerry Rice and Lynn Swan back there. There's nothing you can do.
I was bringing this up on my local radio show today. I was wrong about number one. I love what the Bears did this offseason in bringing in Allen. They locked up.
They drafted a great fantasy team.
They
acquired a great fantasy team.
That's a great point. And I thought that was going to be enough because I remember what Carolina did the year before with Bryce Young, where they basically surrounded him with nobody. And then you look at what they did this year to try to fix that, where they add Deontay Johnson, they draft Jatavian Sanders, they draft Jonathan Brooks, they draft Xavier Legette. I think they understood it's not enough to pick this guy number one. You got to surround him with stuff.
Right.
And I thought what the Bears did, I thought their offensive line was good enough when you had those weapons. I was wrong. It is not good enough. And I think that you can make the case that some of these guys have not developed the way that the Bears wanted them to on the offensive line. They're going to have to go after that in the offseason. I think you're right.
Well, if you look at the 2 best teams in the NFL, the Detroit Lions, amazing offensive line.
Yep. Yeah.
The Kansas City Chiefs invested in that offensive line. tremendous offensive line. What does that tell you? You need an offensive line. Even when Philadelphia went to the Super Bowl, the tush push, what were they known for? It was built from the inside out, not the outside in.
And I think you're kind of seeing that a little bit now. I wouldn't say Dallas has any playmakers in the backfield right now, but you think about when they were really, really good offensively, and that offense was humming along. They had probably the best offensive line in the league for 2 years straight, right? And that was a big reason why Elliott was able to do what he did. And I know he's older now, and I know Rico Dowdle doesn't have the pedigree, but you look at that Dallas offense right now, and I'm saying, I shouldn't say right now, because obviously with Cooper Rush, it's a different offense. But even when they had Prescott, they were not moving the ball the way that they should have, because that offensive line is not what it used to be. It's something that's totally underrated in the NFL. Offseason checklist for the Bears: head coach, OC, and offensive line, not necessarily in that order, but I do like what they'll be bringing back next year. And honestly, Don, I mean, you've been playing for high-stakes fantasy football for decades. Like, you think about what the Bears could be in drafts next year. We have recency bias in our mind. Maybe Caleb Williams is a bargain next year. Maybe Odunze and DJ Moore come at a bargain, given how this season could end. I mean, if you like these guys and if you have them in Dynasty, you're almost rooting for the Bears to just fall completely apart, because you can get them at a good deal, assuming they do the right moves in the offseason, getting the right coaches and offensive linemen.
For sure. Absolutely. And if the Bears really are bad, I can wear this to Vegas next year and draft my entire team with this.
Yes. And we'd love to see it. You will, if we're recording videos out there, you will be in that for sure. No
Somehow
question.
I can imagine that. Are we done with the Bears for the
Yes, we're moving on. We're moving on.
It's getting warm. I'll be right back. Hold on.
Take it off. Don Metter taking his Lucha Libre.
I got two alter egos. I gotta come up with a name for my Nacho Libre guy. And I'm the middle-aged big guy. So middle-aged big guy, I'm back to that now.
And we're good with that, because this is the guy who won the 2009 FFPC Main Event. So now we're really going to get into it. I noticed, and maybe this is your draft experts teams, because I didn't sort them by like Main Event, Fantasy Pros, or whatever. But you did have a lot of Sam Darnold on your squads this year. And I'm kind of curious, was last week against the Jaguars simply an aberration? Like, this isn't going to happen again. It was just a weird game. Or are you concerned about Darnold going forward? Because he played Jacksonville last week. He gets Tennessee this week. The way you beat Tennessee is not on the ground. It's through the air. Would you have any reservations about starting him against Tennessee on the road?
I have a tough time if I have to start him. The reason I drafted Sam Darnold, a lot of times when I draft, there's no like set equation that I use one way or another. He was an first overall pick. Sometimes it takes some guys years to develop. I love the head coach up there. God, that dude, he won with Josh Downs. He won with, guys that never played, and he handled the team and kept them respectable for the year. And let's face it, you have Hawkinson, you have Aaron Jones, you have the God himself, Justin Jefferson. So I just think a good coach plays to a player's strength. And do I want to start Sam Darnold every week? No. But as part of a rotation or a streaming type situation, I'd have no problem playing him this week. I really wouldn't, because I think you throw Jefferson a 5-yard pattern, or Addison for that matter. There's a guy that's really underperformed this year. He's going to have an eruption of a game, I would think, and it could be this one against Tennessee.
Sam Darnold this week against Tennessee, he comes in, or excuse me, the Vikings come in. I'm kind of curious. I haven't looked at this spread. The Vikings are a 6-point favorite, total of 39.5. So maybe this is a game that should be positive for Aaron Jones, but he's dinged up right now. And Tennessee can be gotten through the air. So you think about how healthy they are right now. You mentioned all those guys, Jordan Addison, obviously, as well. This could be a Darnold week when we look at this.
I think a lot of this game also falls on the Minnesota defense, because if they keep putting the pressure on Levis, that field position game, you're going to have Sam Darnold starting with short fields, if you ask me. I think he'll be 40, the midfield. I think the pressure that they'll put on Levis will really help them a lot.
This is kind of just a departure. 4 teams on bye this week. I do believe we have 6 teams on bye next week, Don. We've dealt with this bye-mageddon thing before, where we have, essentially a fifth of the league not playing. Have you been able to, and it always seems like really, really good high-stakes players are able to do this. I have not been able to. where you look ahead and you're trying to pick up these guys a week ahead of time, so you're not scrambling the following week when 6 teams are on bye? What's been your luck at that? Have you been able to do that in the course of your career?
So historically, what I've always tried to do, regardless of bye weeks, because the old adage, I got to get there to make it worth something.
Right.
And this year we have 6 teams off in week 14, our championship week. I've always tried to build the best roster regardless, because we have injuries that happen. The bye weeks play into it. I don't have that crystal ball, but if I have depth, the bye weeks are almost irrelevant. Now, I can't have 3 quarterbacks with the same bye, so obviously it factors in there. But for the most part, I really don't pay that much attention to it, unless like I have a full backfield that's off or with injuries. Usually that's what happens. I check more depth pieces than anything else, and that's kind of how I roll with it.
Let's go out to the YouTube chat. Another FFPC player chiming in. Dave Nowitzki wants to know this week, Don, Jaylen Warren or Nick Chubb, which one are you starting? Chubb is at New Orleans this week. Jaylen Warren is at home against the Ravens in a huge 1 o'clock showdown in Pittsburgh. If you could only play one of these guys this week, would you be going Chubb at New Orleans, or would you be going Warren at home against the Ravens?
So in our normal, I assume our FFPC format, I would play Chubb. I think opportunities, and by the way, when I say that, Nick Chubb certainly has not looked like the Nick Chubb of old.
Right.
But Nick Chubb will have 20 opportunities. I don't know what Jaylen Warren will have. If Pittsburgh gets out to a lead, and I don't know how you hold Lamar Jackson down this year. That team is just unbelievable. But, they're going to try and go tick, 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 tick on the clock. And that's not a Jaylen Warren game. That's a Najee Harris game. That's a short passing game. Or not a short passing game. That's a Najee Harris game. So I like Nick Chubb there for a short touchdown. He's all they got, and that would be my thought on it.
Now I'm gonna agree with you, number one. But I will say this about Jaylen Warren. Well, number one, let me say this about Nick Chubb. I'm not at all surprised this is the level of play we're seeing from him, given his age and given the injury he was coming off of. I saw these people drafting him in a lot of leagues, and quite frankly, I did it a couple of times. One of those FOMO picks where I just didn't want to miss out on him. But so far this year, I mean, he's kind of been underwhelming. And that offense, quite frankly, has kind of been underwhelming. We'll see what they do this week. I think it is Chubb because of the volume, which you suggested. However, in Warren's defense, this past week, season high in carries with 14, 66 yards on the ground. He also gets 2 catches for 29 yards. Now, that's not like, any kind of like world-beating score, fantasy score that you're going to see. Sigmund Bloom from Football Guys pointed this out. I can't remember if it was this week or last week, but he pointed out the Steelers' upcoming schedule. And it was all these games that they were either facing high-octane offenses or potential shootouts or games where they were going to have to try to win from behind. To his point, the Steelers are 3-point dogs this week. The total's 48.5. In that sense, I would think it would be a Jaylen Warren game than a Najee Harris game. This is what Bloom was pointing out, and I happen to agree with him on this. And that could you could make the case that way for Warren. Maybe he's the higher ceiling play this week, but I do like overall. I think I'm going to start Nick Chubb over Jaylen Warren this week as it stands right now, simply because he's going to touch the ball a lot more.
I always find just a rule of thumb for me, those divisional opponents, those divisional games, they know each other so well. I think I love when you have or out of conference games, and they don't see each other except every 3 or 4 years. I love that. Those just seem to be games that are kind of more, they're like lottery tickets. And I really, really like that. Here, after the shootout we saw last Thursday with Cincinnati and Baltimore, would it surprise me if the score was 24-17? You're like, wait, where'd all the scoring come from? These are bitter rivals. And most of the time, these games are really very, very close. So we'll see.
The old adage used to be like, and I think this is another Sigmund Bloom thing, where it's like every final score of the Ravens and Steelers is always like 16-12. Or 16-13, right?
Yeah.
But, the way that Wilson has that offense going and you think about the Ravens defense this year, sometimes it's hard to keep. I'll say this, like, we hear the phrase complimentary football from coaches around the NFL and college football all the time, where you got to have all three phases on the same page. I'll bring this back to I'll make this real brief because I know the viewers don't care about my high school football career. But when I was in high school, I played defense. I was a boundary corner. And we had, at the time I graduated, which is quite a while ago now, we had the fourth worst defense in school history. But our offense was the second best in school history. And part of the reason why that happened was because we give up this 15-play drive, Don. We'd be exhausted. We'd come back to the sideline, and our all-state running back would bust off an 80-yard run, and suddenly we're back out there again, right? And I think that might be plaguing the Ravens' defense a little bit this year, where Lamar Jackson is the odds-on favorite to win the MVP. He's got so many big plays with Andrews and Likely and Derrick Henry, who's been unbelievable this year. Now they had Deontay Johnson. I think sometimes it's difficult for the Ravens defense to catch their breath when Lamar Jackson is treating these games like arena league games, and he's throwing the ball over the field successfully. And I think that's neutered. I don't want to say neutered the defense, but I think the Ravens defense has taken a step back, which could mean a higher scoring game in this Ravens-Steelers game. Nothing would surprise me in a rivalry game, to your point.
You're exactly
I want to talk about Travis Etienne now as we shift to the Jacksonville Jaguars. 11. This is against the Vikings last week. 11 carries, 44 yards. He only sees one target, which he catches for -1 yards, which, I mean, that's not good. And he wasn't good in week 9. He missed the 2 games before that due to injury. Quite frankly, this is a dude who has not topped 70 rushing yards all season. He has found the end zone exactly twice and none since week 2. No times has he scored a touchdown since week 2. He had 1 game where he had 6 catches. Otherwise, it's been 2, it's been 1, it's been 0, it's been 3. It's been pretty lackluster. Now they go to Detroit this week. They don't have Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. It's probably going to be Mac Jones. What are your thoughts on Travis Etienne this week? I mean, there's a non-zero chance, and maybe higher than a non-zero chance, Don, that some people who drafted Etienne as their starting running back, as their top running back, might consider benching him at Detroit this week.
So do you remember when I said earlier in the conversation, one of my weaknesses is guys that I like, I tend to
stick with them too long.
Side of things, yeah. I have Travis Etienne in a couple leagues. I drafted him where you'd expect, mid-third round, thinking I got to steal 50 catches, 60 catches, 1,000 yards, 1,200 yards, whatever it was. He had a great year. Tank Bigsby up until this year was nothing. I have Travis Etienne on my roster. Guess who's not playing this week for me?
Etienne.
Travis Etienne.
Yeah.
Can't play him. If I had to play Travis Etienne, it's because I have a Giant. I have Tyrone Tracy. I have Chuba Hubbard. I have James Conner. I can't play him. Because at this point of the year, if you care about who your lineups are, and you know what I mean, if you're in contention, you can't take the risk to have a 17 yards rushing and a catch for 5 yards. You can't take that risk. So where would I go with him? I would leave him on my bench. He'd be a bench stash. Let him do something for me or for the team, prove something to me. I will say this about him, Eric. I don't think he's done. I think he's a guy that got hit with some injuries. He's always been injury prone. He's on the smaller side, but I don't think he just go bad like that at his age. I don't think. So, I think he's a stash, but I don't think he can play him.
Travis Etienne was a guy that the Jaguars drafted in the first round, the same year they took Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
A guy who is 25 years old.
First year. Who missed
right.
the first
missed
year.
his first year because of that knee injury.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
He didn't have any wear and tear on him.
That's a great point, too. His best football, I think, to your point, is still in front of him. I actually do like the rise of Tank Bigsby on this team for 2 reasons. Number one, it should keep Etienne healthy as long as Bigsby's healthy. Etienne won't get overworked. He'll be on the field the majority of the season. Maybe he doesn't get a ton of spike week games, but he'll be healthy, especially when you need him most at the end of the season. And 2, I like Bigsby because this could depress Etienne's draft value a little bit in 2025, too.
See, I like that.
Yeah.
This is a guy that's already looking forward to next year. I love your style.
Well, listen, when you're out of contention by week 5, Don, this is all I have left now. It's
I hear you.
2025.
I hear you. Wow.
No, but I like that's the thing. Like I think, and I don't know if you're like this too. it's exciting to see week one, to see how your guys perform. But there is a part of me, no matter how good week one goes, I could go undefeated in 20 some leagues, and still part of me, at least a little tiny part of me after week one is like, okay, how am I going to handle drafts next year with, and I know everything's going to change over the course of the season, but I'm always thinking, playing a dynasty, you're always thinking how these values can change. So, but ETN is an interesting guy going forward, not only this season, but in future years as well. Speaking of dynasty, one of the guys I got at the end of a lot of the first rounds of my dynasty leagues this year is Ricky Pearsall. And then think about the stuff that this guy went through. Hurt in training camp, then he gets shot. 10 weeks later, he scores on like a 40-some yard touchdown catch from Brock Purdy. There are a lot of people excited, and rightfully so, about Ricky Pearsall, given his draft pedigree, given the offense that he's in right now. However, next to Deebo Samuel, he is not the only competition there. You do have Juwan Jennings, who I know a lot of fantasy players are very excited about, especially in the wake of Brandon Ayuk. What's the best way to spend a roster spot this year on that second 49ers receiver? Is it Jennings or is it Pearsall for you?
All right. So here I'm going to shock the world with this answer. I actually think Jennings is the best receiver on that team.
Wow. Here we go. Hot take. Here we go. All right, let's hear it.
For the rest of this year, I'm not talking about for the future.
Right.
For the rest of this year, I think he's the best receiver on that team. For the way their schedule lines up, I love Deebo Samuel. I really, really do. But Jennings is used on intermediate routes. He's the biggest receiver they got. If Kittle gets dinged up, he can play more of that position near the goal line. And I really like Deebo a lot, but I would say the way you phrased the question, I would take Jennings over Pearsall.
Jennings right now, I think, is the guy I like best. I'm surprised to hear you say that he's the. Now, are you just talking about? And I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. For fantasy value, Jennings is the better guy over Samuel this year.
I believe it is
for the remainder of the season, I should say.
Yeah, I think he is. I think when you look at the numbers, he'll end up with more catches. I think he'll have, and I know he's not going to get the rushing yards, but I think he'll offset that because I think he'll get more touchdowns in the end zone. Okay. I have a league where I have both a trading league where I have Deebo and Jennings, and I traded Deebo.
Really? Okay.
Jennings, yeah. To me, it's a very similar scenario to the Drake London, Darnell Mooney scenario, where I just think the value is better with Jennings moving forward.
That game for the Niners this week, 49ers at home against the Seahawks coming off the bye is Seattle. 49ers 6.5-point favorites. 49.5 is the total too. And the other thing too is I think a rising tide raises all ships, and that rising tide at San Francisco is Christian McCaffrey. I think there's a lot of people that are worried about, oh God, the volume's going to be down for Samuel and Jennings and Pearsall. Well, the volume could get larger given that McCaffrey's going to keep the 49ers offense on the field more.
This offense, Balky, they have 2,000. That offense can feed 2,000-yard receivers. Yep. We're forgetting Brandon Ayuk was there last year and had a better statistical season, I think, not including the rushing yards, than Deebo. He went over 1,000 yards. He had 7 or 8 touchdowns. Brock Purdy looks for those bigger receivers near the goal line. He does. So I think
and to your point, didn't Jennings have like a 50-point or a 45-point week already this season?
He played. Yeah, he had 3 touchdowns on 175 yards.
So he's done it already. I mean, there shouldn't be much doubt about him anymore. Let's talk about the Ravens here real quick. Thursday night was a massive fantasy night, obviously with Burrow and Chase and so on and so forth. But you think about the Ravens with Henry and Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman to a certain extent. Zay Flowers was kind of quiet that night. Now, I don't think it was necessarily because of Deontay Johnson, because Johnson was still kind of getting acclimated to the Ravens.
Only played 18. I think he only had 18 snaps.
Right. His impact on Zay Flowers, at least for that game, was minimal, if at all, if anything. But when you think about what the Ravens have said this week, wanting to get Deontay Johnson involved more, wanting to get him on the field more, now they're coming off essentially the mini bye after playing in the Thursday night game. Was that Flowers' quiet night actually a sign of things to come with the way it seems the Ravens want to treat Deontay Johnson? I think Flowers is an interesting guy because we were automatically locking him into our lineups every single week. And now I think, maybe we're still doing that. Maybe we're still starting him. But I think it comes with more pause and more thought. This is a more nuanced decision starting Zay Flowers going forward.
Okay, so this week they're playing the Steelers. Deontay Johnson played for the Steelers.
Yep.
I could see them wanting to feed him a score and maybe trying to use him to maybe there's a little, I don't want to use the word revenge game, but perhaps it is. Personally, I think Zay Flowers is a beast of a player. He's a great route runner. He's quick. He's fast. He's always, if you look statistically at his numbers, he'll have the blow up games and then be the 3 for 40, the 4 for 39 guy. And then suddenly here 2 weeks ago, they're playing Denver. Patrick Surtain, the guy goes off for what? 6 catches, 140 yards, 2 touchdowns. Who would have thought that? But that happened to be the game that it was. So, I think moving forward, it is a nuanced decision. And I think you almost have to plan that out. That team has been very schizophrenic. The only thing that's been that you start for sure every week has been Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson and obviously Justin Tucker. But, where was Mark Andrews for the first 5 weeks of the year? He has, I don't know if you've seen the stat. He has 4 touchdowns in his last 17 catches, which, by the way, have come on 18 targets. So he's at 18 targets, 17 catches, and 4 touchdowns. Likely disappeared, realistically. So to answer the question, I think there's room for both of them. I think that offense just is humming along, and I think you play them. And play them both if you have to. I wouldn't have any reservation about playing either one of them, put it to you that way. Because I'm not a big Rashad Bateman guy.
Yeah.
And I think Deontay Johnson's just a better possession receiver.
I had Bateman on a few leagues, and I was pleased. I had to start him in one league because of buys and injuries last week. But that was his best game of the season. I don't think he's going to have a better one the rest of the way. I am with you. I think Flowers is still the guy there. Johnson, I think, he's creeping in now to got to look at him as a flex, especially this week against Pittsburgh.
In today's NFL, every team has 2 wide receivers. Even on the poor teams. I mean, here, you go to New Orleans pre-injury. You had Olave and you had Shaheed. The Bears had Green Bay's got a multitude of guys. Jordan Addison, Jeffrey. Every team, the game has changed. You feed 2 wide receivers. That's just the way it goes. And so I think you got room for both of them. You can feed all the mouths in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I think Flowers is obviously, almost inarguably the more explosive player at this point of his career. But, think about explosive. There are so many coaches that talk about getting explosive plays. That's a focus of what they want to do every week. And I think the reason they want to get it is because it's so hard to get with so many defenses going to that too high safety look. It's tough to get explosive plays. Well, what are defenses willing to give up if they're not willing to give up the big plays? The underneath stuff. Who does the underneath stuff better on Baltimore? Deontay Johnson. So he should thrive, especially with the way Mark Andrews threatens teams down the seam, and Zay Flowers can threaten them deep. Rashad Bateman can threaten them deep. I think the second half of the season is still rosy for Deontay Johnson. Don Vivian Jane on YouTube right now wants to know, starting this week, Deontay Johnson against the Steelers or Christian Watson at Soldier Field against your beloved Bears?
Oh, boy. Vivian Jane, you know what? What a question. I'm surprised you let that one come through. You know what? I would play Deontay Johnson this week instead of Christian Watson. I'm not a Watson guy. I'm a Giant. If you saw who I have, probably my highest ranked player I have, and he's been disappointing.
Jaden Reed.
You got it, Jaden Reed. And it annoyed the bejesus out of me week 1 when he went off on the Thursday night game and had 170 yards and 3 scores. I was drafting him in the 6th round. I had to draft him in the 2nd and 3rd round to get him. Yeah. There's too many guys in Green Bay. Maybe Watson does something, maybe he doesn't. But I think Deontay Johnson's a better play under that scenario.
I'm with you. The thing with the Packers is, and I've said this on the show ad nauseum all year, I never know who's going to have a big week. Watson, Reed, Dobbs, Tucker Kraft, Josh Jacobs. It's just too confusing for me on a week-to-week standpoint. Permar99 pointing out, too, that Deontay Johnson, elite separator, 25% target share everywhere he has played. And to that point, Permar has a question for us. Who should he start this week? You got Mike Williams, who's now playing for the Steelers, against the Ravens this week. You got Deontay Johnson against the Steelers. Mike Gesicki, I'm assuming this is FFPC tight end premium scoring here. Gesicki is at Los Angeles. And then you get Gus Edwards, who potentially is coming off IR. I think he is already actually off IR.
Did you see Gus Edwards? He comes off of IR. You have Dobbins running up and down the field for the last 8 weeks. Gus the Bus comes out, took 10 or 11 carries from him.
That's right. That's right.
Literally
He did
an almost full split. It was unbelievable.
And by the way, Edwards is going up against Gesicki's Bengals. So you got basically 2 games this week. The Ravens and the Steelers, the Bengals versus the Chargers. If you could only start one of these guys, who is it here?
If I had to start only one of those guys, and again, who knows who's playing who, I would narrow it down. I wouldn't play Mike Williams. I wouldn't play Gesicki because I'm going to assume that T. Higgins is going to come back. And then that kind of limits Gesicki a little bit. I'm going to go with Gus the Buster. You're fighting me. I can see it, Balky. You're fighting me.
No, well, here's the thing. I think you're right as long as Higgins comes back.
Yeah.
If Higgins doesn't come back, then tight end premium scoring, I am leaning towards Gesicki. If Higgins is back, then yeah, it's Edwards over Williams. It's Edwards over Deontay Johnson. You pointed out his usage last week. Fresh legs now coming in too.
Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it when I saw it. I was picking him up. I picked him up in a few leagues the week before for like $1, just because I'm like, well, in case Dobbins gets hurt. Who knew that Harbaugh is going to literally run him right off the bat? It was unbelievable.
Right. Yeah, it was good to see if you picked him up for $1 for sure.
Yeah.
As we look back on week 10, Don, was there any besides the obvious stuff, was there anything that kind of maybe flew under the radar? Just the biggest surprises for you? Gus Edwards, clearly one of them, no question. Are there any other surprises that kind of stood out to you this past weekend of NFL football?
It's too hot, so I'm not going to wear it. But nine sacks,
Ugh.
9 sacks and 3 points. You can't score an offensive touchdown. Really?
23 straight drives now, right? Without an offensive touchdown for the Bears?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what they're doing. That was very surprising to me. Here, I'll give you one, and it's macabre to say it this way. How about a lack of injuries? No season endings. I'm so used to ACLs, torn the hamstring. It's the year of the hamstring. Guys are out 5 and 6 weeks with hamstrings. It seems as though, unless something pops up on the injury report, we've kind of made it somewhat unscathed through the injury bug, at least in week 10.
And now that you say this, you know what's going to happen. We're going to have all these devastating week 11 injuries heading into week 12, and we got 6 teams on bye.
Yeah, well, don't give anyone my email address because they're gonna email me and jinx me, or they're gonna start coming after me.
Tom Smith, right now on the YouTube chat, biggest surprise for him: Cooper Rush getting 0.45 points this past week. Mother of God, that Dallas offense right now, Don. That is something I don't want to be in business with at all.
You know what I love about fantasy football? About week 5, I said, why didn't I draft Cowboys?
Yeah.
The only Cowboy I think I have, I might have Jalen Tolbert on the team.
No Ferguson?
I have Super Toe, Brandon Aubrey. Other than that, I didn't take a Dallas Cowboy. Right now, I'm laughing. I'm like, my God, this team's going to be pathetic the rest of the year. The coach will be gone. Jerry, you know what I've really come to recognize about football? I was talking to a buddy about this the other day. You look at the Dallas Cowboys, you look at the New York Jets, you look at the Carolina Panthers, and there's another team that escapes me, and I can't remember who it is, but what do they all have in common? They all have meddling owners that think they're GMs, and the teams stink. So as I look at Dallas and Jerry Jones and David Tepper with Carolina.
Was it Cleveland?
Haslam. It could be, yeah. There's another one, right? Because here, you know that coaching staff did not want Deshaun Watson.
No,
they did not want Deshaun Watson. Yet they're stuck with him. And I mean, so you look at that. It's amazing what you see. And yeah, Dallas, unbelievable what that team is. And I mean, I think a question should be, where does a CeeDee Lamb rank the rest of the year? I mean, you have Cooper Rush. It can't be that long before that team says, let's see what we have in Trey Lance. What are we going to do?
We kind of already saw it this past week where Lance got in a little bit,
You're right.
And then they went back to Cooper Rush. So poor Mike McCarthy, he is just, it's one of those things where it's like you're in a dream and you're having this dream where you're just falling off a cliff and you're reaching for just anything that you can grab onto, right? And that's what McCarthy's doing right now, just reaching for anything.
The Dallas Cowboy head coaching job, it's like the Cuisinart of coaching. You go in one way, you're all excited, and you come out mush.
The Cuisinart
they just
of coaching,
grind you into the top of the thing, and you come out in just pieces because they beat you up, they kill you. Jerry Jones annihilates you, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, and that's. But people will do it. They'll take advantage of it because of how profile of a job it is. We'll see who the next coach is. I'm with you. I think McCarthy's gone at the end of this year.
For sure. By the way, McCarthy wants to be gone. He doesn't
Does he?
want a headache. The team's old. The team has no running back. The offensive line isn't that good. They're going to have to pay. They're going to be barbelled. You're going to have 3 stars on one side, 3 stars on the other side, and a bunch of garbage in between. The time to win in the NFL, Bulky, you know this. Take that quarterback with the rookie contract. You can surround him with other things. Once you have to pay that quarterback $50 million, it's very hard to win.
It gets more difficult. It does. It definitely gets more challenging. And that's when you have to be good at drafting on day 3 and finding starters on day 3. And if you can do that, then yeah, you can keep it going. But it takes all sides. You got to be able to coach these guys up. You got to be able to find the diamonds in the rough for sure. Your favorite ad on the FFPC waiver wire this week, Don? I understand you may not want to give a whole lot away since the waiver wire will not process until about 24 hours.
You know what? I don't care. Here it is.
Okay, let's hear it.
Here, obviously, if you can get them, because I looked up earlier. I do picks on Tuesday, and then I kind of refresh on Wednesday. I write stuff down. Obviously, the running back on Denver, Sean Payton's been very transparent with, what's his name? Audric Estime. Yeah, Estime. Yeah. He's been very transparent, saying, a lot of times you hear coach speak where they go, yeah, we're going to get him touches, and then he gets 3 carries for 6 yards. They gave him some looks. And, Javonte Williams, I don't think Javonte Williams he's the previous regime. I don't think he's anything to really look at. Honestly, I think if you're playing now, your team is pretty solid, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. The best advice I could give to someone battling is look for your bye weeks here that you have next week in week 14. Make sure you're covered for the playoffs should you be lucky enough to make it. Look at your defensive matchups. Bulky, I have a couple teams. This is going to, even I can't believe this. I actually have 2 teams that have 3 defenses. 3 defenses.
How does that happen? Like, why do you, I don't. So, listen, I don't want to talk bad about it because obviously I have seen it work from so many teams. I struggle to and I always try to keep 2 defense. When I'm playing at the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, that is really heavy defensive scoring. So you want a good matchup. But having 3 in the FFPC, when I'm trying to, catch all these other running backs and receivers as depth, I'm just always in awe of how people are able to do that. I can't do that. I don't know how you do it.
Very, very hard. And I don't have it in all my leagues, but I have a couple. And what I do is I start to go through and say, okay, in week 14, you have Washington off and I have Houston off, which are 2 of my Ds. Well, there's a team, and I can't remember who it is, who Carolina's playing. Their D was out there. I'm like, well, you know what? That's championship week. I want my D to go against Carolina, but I don't want to drop the other ones that got me there because I like their matchups.
Right.
And you roll the dice, and maybe you go with, 1 less running back, or you got a backup. It's hard to do. It's really hard.
Okay, so a couple of things I want to do here before we sign off. Permar99 says the favorite off the waiver wire this week should not be Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Could not agree with them more. I think that's fool's gold there. Don, do you agree? Are you staying away from him?
Without a doubt, it's the guy you chase. And yeah, no, you leave him alone and not a chance. This week he'll have 1 catch for 7 yards.
Right, exactly. Now, the other one I want to bring up here too, which Rubio is bringing this up about Marshawn Lloyd. Now, according to Matt Schneidman yesterday, who covers the Packers for The Athletic, said that Lloyd is expected to practice this week. So they could activate him for this game against the Bears. Josh Jacobs, 33% rush opportunity this season. Emmanuel Wilson graded out. I'm not making this up. I mean, take Pro Football Focus grades with a grain of salt. I get it. But they graded out Emmanuel Wilson as the 4th best offensive player for the Packers this year. 4th best. And this is not going to be easy for Lloyd to crack into the number 2 spot on Green Bay's running back depth chart. I think it's important to have the backup there. But the third string guy, I think that's kind of a stretch. Permar 99 is interested in picking him up, but who does he drop? Does he drop Jordan Mason? I don't think I could drop Jordan Mason for Marshawn Lloyd.
I agree. I would never drop a backup for a third backup.
And that's what Lloyd. That's what you think Lloyd's going to be, right? He's going to be third string.
I mean, yeah, I do. I mean, you got Lewis or Wilson, who's been there all year. He's played. He's doing what he needs to do. A lot of things we miss because we only follow statistics off. How do these guys grade out blitz pickups? I don't think if this team's fighting for a playoff and they're going against the Vikings, they're going to have him in there on a 3rd and 13 because who knows what the blitz pickup's going to be. So those situational things that we don't notice because we're so stats driven really are going to factor into this. Coaches don't play, as far as I know, coaches don't play fantasy football, nor do they care.
Yeah, no, they don't. Because they're concerned about their job. They're concerned about getting wins. And that's what it's all about for them. For us, it's all about getting wins in fantasy football. For us, it's all about stacking up points. A guy who has been able to do it successfully for 20 plus years is Don Metter, the 2009 FFPC Main Event champion, and a guy who has won the better part of 24 FFPC high-stakes leagues this year. 49th place heading into week 11 of the FFPC Main Event, man. Thank you, number one, so much for joining me tonight. This was awesome, so much fun. And then good luck the rest of the way in trying to win that $1 million, man. Hopefully we can get you back on again when you're telling me how you're going to spend that $1 million.
Balky, I'd be happy to do it. I guarantee you. My wife, my kids, everybody's on right now. They'll have many suggestions on how to spend. Should we be lucky enough to win it? By the way, one of my team names, my wife she rescued a couple baby squirrels. So when Chris got me to do a Saturday morning league, she goes, yeah, I got you signed up. Your team name is Baby Squirrels. Take a guess what team is 49.
Baby Squirrels. There you go.
Exactly right. You're exactly right.
It works out sometimes like that.
So I need one thing just to think about. Maybe you could do a poll. Ask how many guys think I should wear this to the draft next year. Wear it for the entire draft.
It'd be overwhelming. I don't think you get anybody saying no, you should not wear that. Tom Smith is already he's already totally in favor of this, that you have to make the Nacho Libre Bears mask debut at Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas next year. He's already on board.
I'll do that. You know what? Tell him I'm in. And just for the sake of everybody else, I will not wear the tights or the leotards, so it will be all good.
I think that would be best.
Balky, you've seen me. You've seen me in person. Yeah, we don't need anyone to be looking.
There are very few people that can pull off the tights and leotard look. Yeah. And so, no offense to you, I think you're in the 99% on that.
And by the way, all the rest of us sitting in that draft room, very, very few could do it as well.
It's true. It's 100% true. Todd, thanks so much, man. This was awesome. We'll talk with you again real soon, dude.
Thanks, bro. We'll see you anytime you need. You know how to find me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Don Metter, the 2009 FFPC Main Event champion and 15-time FFPC High-Stakes Leagues winner, joining me on the show tonight. That is a wrap for the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. We are live next Tuesday, November 19th at 10 p.m. with 13-time FFPC League champion Harley Copen. He is going to join me on the show. We're going Hollywood, baby, SoCal. We get Harley Copen on next week to talk about his teams and heading into week 12 of the FFPC and the FantasyPros Championship. The high-stakes fantasy football show on the Better Sports Network will go live this Thursday night, 7 o'clock. Once again, we will be your pregame lead into a massive Thursday night game, Commanders and Eagles. A lot of implications on that as you guys are all fighting for FFPC playoff spots. So make sure you're tuning into that, 7 o'clock Eastern time. RotoViz's Hassan Rahim will join me on that program for 2 full hours. We'll carry you into the second quarter of that game as well. That starts at 7 o'clock this Thursday. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is live again this Friday at 10 p.m. KFFSC Commissioner Farrell Elliott will co-host with me as we welcome on FantasyPros Championship 27th place team owner Eric von Gutenberg. He is going to join us, the pride of Denver, Colorado. will hop aboard to talk about how his team is trying to make its way up to the top of the leaderboard to win a $1 million grand prize. You can't win $1 million in the FFPC Weekly Challenge this week, but you could win up to $2,500, and you can enter for as little as $35 right now at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on this video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will once again be Thursday night, 7 o'clock. Hassan Rahim from RotoViz and myself for 2 full hours. Thank you so much for watching. RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown returns next week at 10 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday night. Appreciate it, everybody. Your week continues now, and we will talk with you again real soon. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.